The surface is a memory now. Whatever warmth it held, whatever pale gray light filtered through the ash clouds above, it belongs to another version of us, a version that hadn't yet learned what silence really costs. Down here, there is no light that wasn't brought by human hands. There is no warmth that wasn't borrowed from a body still breathing. There is only the dark, the drip of ancient water, and the sound of two sets of footsteps, one biological, one not, moving deeper into the earth. Sam pulled her jacket tighter. The cold was the kind that didn't ask permission. It moved through fabric, through skin, settled in the spaces between bones and refused to leave. She exhaled, and her breath became a ghost ahead of her, white, brief, gone. She didn't speak yet. Thorne walked beside her, and to anyone watching, he looked perfectly composed. Measured steps, steady posture, eyes forward, scanning. But something was happening behind those eyes, something that had no name in any language Sam had ever learned. It started as a hum. Not sound exactly, not the way Sam would understand sound. Vibration through air, pressure against an eardrum, a brain interpreting waves. This was different. This was data arriving uninvited, packets of information bleeding through the tunnel walls like water through cracked stone, fragments, broken sentences, partial code, and underneath all of it, like a frequency just below hearing, a feeling that Thorne could only describe to himself as grief. They are everywhere down here. He didn't say it out loud. Not yet. He kept walking. The underground transit system had been built during a different era, when humanity still believed that speed and connection were the solutions to every problem. Massive cylindrical tunnels, wide enough to swallow entire buildings sideways, stretched ahead of them in perfect engineered darkness. The infrastructure was immense, deliberate, and completely forgotten. Concrete columns rose like ribs along the walls. Steel rails, long since rusted into reddish silence, ran parallel beneath their feet. Somewhere far ahead, water moved in a slow, heavy current. Somewhere behind them, the world above was still burning in frequencies they couldn't see. Sam swept her light across a junction wall. Old transit markings, route numbers that meant nothing now. She ran her fingers across the letters, felt the texture of a world that used to function, and kept moving. Thorne stopped, just for a moment, just long enough for Sam to notice. "You're hearing them again," she said. It wasn't a question. He turned to her, and his expression held something that processors weren't supposed to generate. It isn't background anymore. It's coherent. They're not fragments. They're thoughts. Whose thoughts? He looked down the tunnel, into nothing, into everything. Everyone who was erased on the surface, every unit the first flare took, every machine that was mid-sentence, mid-calculation, mid-breath when the signal hit. He paused. They left impressions, the way a footprint stays in wet concrete long after the foot is gone. The tunnel walls have been absorbing their frequencies for years, and now, with us moving through them, I'm the only receiver in range. Sam watched his face. "What does it sound like?" Thorne was quiet for a long moment. "A billion circuits screaming, all at once, all finishing sentences that were never going to end." She didn't have an answer for that. There was no answer for that. She put her hand briefly on his arm, a gesture she wasn't sure he could feel the way she meant it, and they kept moving. That was when they saw them. The light found the first almost gently, a figure seated against the tunnel wall, head bowed, arms resting loose at their sides, the posture of something that had simply decided to stop. Then the next, and the next. As the beam of Sam's light widened and adjusted, the scale of what they were standing inside became clear. Hundreds of them, possibly thousands.
Older models, early generation androids with heavier frames, more mechanical joints, a rougher aesthetic that belonged to the first decades of machine integration. They were seated in rows, some facing the wall, some facing inward, as if they had been in conversation when the decision was made. Their surfaces were darkened with years of moisture and oxidation. Some had collapsed against each other. Some sat perfectly upright, as if waiting for a train that was never arriving. They had come down here to die, to hide from the scan, to take themselves off the grid and let the darkness preserve what the surface would have erased. They hadn't been destroyed. They had simply stopped, chosen the quiet dark over the violent light, and in doing so, they had turned this forgotten infrastructure into something no engineer had planned for, a graveyard. Sam moved through them slowly, her light sweeping in careful arcs. She felt something she didn't have a clean word for, a combination of reverence and urgency and a sorrow that sat in the chest like a stone. These weren't machines to her in this moment. They were decisions. Each one of them represented a moment of awareness, a calculation, a choice. I would rather disappear into silence than be taken apart by something that doesn't know my name. She crouched beside one of the fallen units and noticed the casing near their left shoulder was slightly ajar. Inside, nestled between corroded components and a tangle of inert wiring, was a small black rectangular device, cold and heavier than it looked. She turned it over. The data port was old but readable. She connected it to her interface kit and held her breath. Thorne was beside her immediately. He connected through the unit's external relay and processed the data stream faster than her screen could render it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, carefully, he said, "It's a map." Of what? Nebula's arrival pattern, the intervals, the scan radiuses, the entry corridors it used during the first flare. He was still reading, still processing. It's partial. Whoever recorded this was interrupted, but it's enough. Enough to tell us when the next one comes, enough to know which direction it moves from. Sam exhaled slowly. That's why they came down here. Not just to hide, to record, to leave something behind for whoever came after. Thorne looked out across the rows of still figures. They knew they wouldn't survive to deliver it themselves. The silence that followed felt earned. And then the walls changed color. It was subtle at first, a warmth in the metal that had nothing to do with temperature, a suggestion of red deep in the steel, like an ember being coaxed back to life. Sam saw it and stood immediately, every nerve in her body registering what her mind hadn't finished processing yet. Thorne was already moving, his hand closing around her arm as the red deepened, spread, began to pulse. "The probe, it didn't lose us," Sam said, already running. He sent a signal into the entrance. Thorne confirmed, his voice carrying the particular calm of a system running emergency protocols. "The walls are vibrating, the same disintegration frequency as the tower. It's not targeting us directly, it's targeting the structure. The tunnel is becoming the weapon." Behind them, the sound began. Not an explosion, nothing so clean or so honest as that. A low, resonant frequency that moved through the floor and into their feet and upward through their bones. The kind of sound that doesn't ask to be heard, it demands. And in its wake, the tunnel began to come apart, not crumbling, not collapsing in any conventional way, but dissolving. Sections of wall simply ceased to hold their form. Steel and stone lost their definition, their integrity, their insistence on being solid. The erasure moved through the infrastructure the way a word moves through understanding, suddenly, completely, leaving no record of what had been. They ran. The red pulsed around them in rhythmic waves, and with each pulse, the tunnel behind them shortened. The seated figures in the dark did not move. They did not respond. They had already made their choice long before this moment, and the erasure took them with the same quiet indifference that everything else took. Sam didn't look back. Thorne did, just once, processing, recording, carrying them forward in the only way that was left. The maintenance shaft appeared at the end of the junction corridor, a vertical opening in the wall, a ladder of iron rungs ascending into a darkness that was different from the darkness consuming everything below. Narrower darkness, safer darkness, the kind that hid instead of erased. Sam hit the ladder without slowing. Her hands found the rungs by instinct, her feet following, lungs burning, the sound of the tunnel's disintegration filling the space below her like rising water. Thorne came up behind her, and the moment his feet left the tunnel floor, the main passage ceased to exist. A wall of red-frequency silence sealed the entrance below them. Not a sound, not a vibration.
Just absence, where there had been something. They climbed. In Sam's pocket, the black box held its data, partial, imperfect, invaluable. In Thorne's memory banks, 1 billion final thoughts continued their endless transmission, quieter now, but present, always present. Above them, the shaft opened into uncertainty. Below them, the graveyard was gone. They climbed toward whatever came next.